Good evening and welcome to our webinar on challenging behaviors may be more than meets the eye. My name is Ali Gemma, CDC Program Director, and I will be your moderator for the webinar. This webinar is being provided as part of the Tourette Health and Education Program, a program of the Tourette Association of America in partnership with the CDC and in collaboration with Starbridge, a Parent Training Information Center, or PTIC. During the webinar, we will be very happy to hear from you and include your voice in the conversation. You can ask questions or share comments using the question panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player at any time. We will collect your questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Additionally, you'll note that we have some handouts that you can download from your control panel and will be discussed in the presentation. I want to mention that funding for this webinar was made possible by our cooperative agreement with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views expressed by speakers and moderators do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the Department of Health and Human Services, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government. We are very happy today to have Kathy Giordano as our presenter this evening, who is the Tourette Association Education Specialist. She has a background in teaching grades 7 to 12 English. She previously worked for the PTIC at the Advocacy Center, now Starbridge, in upstate New York. And for over 25 years, Kathy has presented information regarding Tourette Syndrome, functional behavioral assessments, and positive proactive behavioral management plans. We also have a special guest with us as well, Laura Arrington, who is the Family and Youth Education Coordinator at Starbridge. This is a grant provided by the PTI, the Parent Training and Information Center. And I'll hand it over to Kathy in a few moments, but I just wanted to get an idea of who we have participating on our webinar this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our first polling question. So this is, what is your relationship to Tourette? And you can go ahead and answer that. So currently, it looks like we have about 40% parents, 40% professional, others are self, also general interest. All right, so that's pretty much summarizes that. And we are also going to be sharing another poll question. So are you familiar with PTICs? In just one moment, I'll pull it up. So you can go ahead and submit your your answers. And so we have about 70% no, 30% yes. All right, so great, thanks for your answers. And Kathy and Laura, I think this will give you somewhat of a feel of who we have on. And again, we certainly welcome and encourage you to submit your questions and comments anytime in the question panel. So without further ado, Kathy, please go ahead with your presentation, and I'll go ahead and mute myself.
Great. Thanks, Ali. I'd like to welcome everyone to a webinar about challenging behaviors, a topic which I have found to be very important over the years. As a parent of 2 adult children with Tourette, one of whom had significant behavioral issues as a child, plus my years of experiencing helping families and professionals, I know very well that children with ADD and obsessive-compulsive disorder and Tourette and learning disabilities, unfortunately, are routinely punished for their symptoms because they're believed to be purposeful and bad behaviors. Our goals for this webinar is to bring some awareness and hopefully some curiosity as to how children with the challenges can be helped rather than just relying on punishing them. So first of all, there's 2 quotes that I want to share that changed me as a parent, as well as my philosophy for supporting families and students and professionals. They're both Ross Greene quotes. And the first one is that children will do well. Children will do well if they can. And if they can't, it's up to us adults to determine why so that we can help the child be successful. Kids really do want to be successful, but unfortunately sometimes things get in the way of that happening. If you ask a young child what they want to be, typically the response would be a doctor, a teacher, a truck driver, a nurse, and so on. I've actually never heard a child say that I want to grow up and be a failure. So children will do well if they can, and sometimes the adults need to provide some interventions and support so that they can be successful. My second Ross Greene quote is probably the most important. It's really, really essential to recognize that it's our explanation for the behavior. It's our explanation for the behavior that determines how we respond to it. So if our explanation for a behavior is that the child is being purposefully bad, our response will most likely be to punish. So basically, if we see a child as having a problem and not being the problem, we are more likely to support that child instead of punishing them. So if we truly want to help a child who's struggling, it just totally makes sense that we need to first determine the true reason that the child is behaving in a way that's not helpful to them. It's only when we know the real reason for the behavior that we can do anything to help the child. I've known some behavioral specialists who rely on the belief that all behaviors are because the child is getting something out of it. I would disagree. I don't think that's a universal general statement because I've learned that with neurological disorders such as Tourette, sometimes the reasons for behaviors are just plain old symptoms. For instance, a child that's rolling their eyes at us, and it might be a sign of disrespect, but it also could be one of the common motor tics of eye rolling. Another common symptom for children with challenging behaviors is disinhibition. Disinhibition is a child may know right from wrong, but the disinhibition impacts their ability to consistently inhibit actions and statements that they know they shouldn't be doing or saying. But the disinhibition gets in the way, and in the moment their mental brakes just don't work, and so their actions and sometimes their statements are what they would rather not be doing, and which they know are bad. So if you have a student or a child, or if you're assisting a family with a child who has challenging behaviors, it's really our responsibility to do our homework. We don't need to be experts, not suggesting that, but we do need to be at least aware of the many disabilities or difficulties that may appear to be bad behaviors. We see the behaviors because they're the tip of the iceberg. But we also need to recognize that there are many underdiagnosed and highly misunderstood disorders that are the real reason for the behaviors. We've included two handouts that we encourage you to download because they briefly describe how each of the disorders that I have on this slide and more can interfere with the education of any child, and that may appear to be purposeful, regardless if the child has or doesn't have Tourette syndrome. So we see the tip of the iceberg, the behaviors. But what we may or may not recognize is that there may be some written language disorders or some obsessive compulsive disorders, social skills, anxiety, learning disabilities, which I see I have 2 times on this slide. I really think LD is important there. Processing delays, sensory issues, attention deficit, memory, executive functioning, vocal tics, sleep issues, motor tics, and difficulty inhibiting. And there could be more. So we really, just to be aware of them, I think is a major important step forward if we are going to be really be helping kids that have challenging behaviors. Challenging behaviors are difficult and exhausting for everybody. And it's human nature. I was going to say unfortunate. I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, but it is human nature. We want simple explanations with simple and easy to do responses. But simple explanations are often not the real reason, so they aren't really helpful and can actually do damage. Some of the assumptions that I hear frequently are listed on this slide. I hear that the child is just lazy, that she does only what she likes, that he has oppositional defiance, they're seeking inappropriate attention, they're purposely disruptive, she likes pushing my buttons, the reason for bad behaviors is bad parenting, or the reason for challenging behaviors is bad teachers. And a lot of times I'm told that they're avoiding things that they don't want to do. So these are all really assumptions. It may appear to be the truth, but we need to recognize when we're making assumptions that, oh my God, I think I'm making an assumption. I need to stop and think about this. And to be curious. I always want to know why, rather than just making assumptions. It's much more positive and fruitful to be curious. It's like we need to put on our detective hats and ask questions. Why would a student make animal noises? Why does a second grader climb under his desk instead of following directions? Why does a child never want to wear socks? Why does he cry every time we go to the mall? Why does he scream if things on his plate are touching? Why does the student turn away whenever I try to help them? Just a lot of questions about why. I experienced an example recently of how assumptions were damaging to a student. I was told prior to my going in and doing an observation that a second grade boy was attention seeking and oppositional defiant because he hid under his desk and made noises that were disruptive to the class every time it was time to do any kind of writing. So because he was hiding under his desk, he was forced to stay after school, and he had to go to the principal's office on a regular basis. Not surprisingly, the little boy became depressed and began to hate school and didn't want to go to school. The reality was the little boy was struggling with writing for some reason. But instead of exploring deeper for the real reason he hid under his desk and made noises, wrong assumptions were made. Fortunately, soon after he was diagnosed with Tourette, which explained his writing difficulty and the noises he was making. I felt that he was being very clear in his communication because the only time he hid under his desk was when the teacher said that we were going to do some writing. So it seemed pretty obvious that writing was a major issue. So I got down on the floor next to him and I said, hey, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I don't write. I said, you don't write? He goes, no. So they needed to do some more research and do some assessments on the boy to figure out what really was going on and what they could do to help. So we want to look at when and when not the behavior is most likely to occur. We want to look at when and where, but also it's important to look at when and where it's least likely to occur. So is it during a specific task? Is it during lunch? Is it during gym? Is there a specific skills deficit? Is it because of sensory overload? Are they overwhelmed? Are they exhausted? Is it due to some anxiety issues, or is there base overflowing, which I'll talk more about that a little bit later. On our website, the Tourette Association website, we have a workbook for conducting functional behavioral assessments and writing positive behavioral intervention plans. The workbook includes Tourette, but it also is helpful for kids with attention deficit and OCD and executive functioning, sensory integration issues, and a lot more. We've actually gotten some very good notices on this workbook that it helps the school to do a proper functional behavioral assessment. So it's only when we carefully examine the reasons that we are able to collect the clues. And the clues are necessary to write a positive and proactive plan so that we can figure out how to support the person so that behaviors are less likely to reoccur. So I've included a few examples of when symptoms are confused and may appear to be look like purposeful behaviors. This obviously is not a complete list, not even close to being a complete list, but I just wanted to give some examples. So this child with excessive movement, can't constantly tapping, wiggling, stands up all the time. You want to look at possibly attention deficit, some sensory issues, Tourette, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or obsessive-compulsive behaviors. And I want to stop here and now just explain what I mean by obsessive-compulsive disorder or obsessive behaviors. If you have OCD, the obsessive and compulsive behaviors are so significant that they interfere with your life in a very significant way. But if we think about it, most of us have some obsessive-compulsive behaviors. They don't interfere with our life significantly, but they can appear to be purposeful, and even obsessive-compulsive behaviors can interfere with a child's education and appear to be purposeful behaviors. Taking shoes off, chewing on an object, chewing on a pencil, chewing on a shirt. It could be a sensory issue, it could be anxiety. Shouting out comments and answers. I hear things like, he's just really quiet. It may be impulsivity due to attention deficit. It may be some obsessive-compulsive stuff, Tourette. The disinhibition again, which is the mental breaks failing. Does not follow instructions. So there may be some pragmatic language deficits. There may be some processing delays or short-term memory deficits, attention deficit, or again, obsessive-compulsive, or some tics that are interfering with the child following the directions. Some more is sloppy handwriting. Messy notes would be dysgraphia, and dysgraphia is difficulty getting thoughts from the brain to the paper. The child may perseverate on something, may have some perfection, doesn't like changes, could be obsessive-compulsive. Difficulty transitioning could be some obsessive-compulsive, anxiety, sensory, processing. Slow to respond could be, again, processing delays, some obsessive-compulsive or Tourette. Inappropriate statements or having difficulty getting along with peers. Could be social communication deficits, which is similar to social skills deficits, but a little bit different, and a speech therapist would know the difference. Pragmatic language deficits. We may hear that he fidgets and makes faces and makes noises and rolls his eyes and has odd movements and odd statements, and for that I would that would be kind of a red flag to see if there's some Tourette that's involved. So, the emotional base. What if there is no apparent reason for a meltdown? Rick Lavoie has a demonstration that is excellent for looking at why some kids have meltdowns that seem to come out of the blue. We tend to look at a child who all of a sudden has a meltdown, and we attempt to figure out what happened immediately prior to that, which would have caused the meltdown. But the emotional vase exercise shows us that what we really need to do is to look at what happened during the day that may have increased the level of the anxiety vase, so that it only took one more small difficulty to have the vase overflow. And when the vase overflows, that's when a meltdown occurs. There's a gazillion reasons why a child's vase will get full. I mean, it really is individual to the kid, but a few examples might be being forced to wear uncomfortable clothes if they have some sensory issues, someone sneezing nearby if they have some obsessive-compulsive stuff about germs, riding the school bus to and from school, having a substitute teacher that doesn't know the kid, being in a loud cafeteria, on and on. There's just a lot of reasons why the vase may fill up, and it may fill up quickly, or it may take to the end of the day before the vase is full. All of these examples can fill up a child's vase, resulting in the child appearing to be fine one minute and then having a meltdown the next. So an extremely important strategy for kids with challenging behaviors is to help them pay attention to the level of their anxiety base. We need to teach them what are you feeling? What are your physical conditions as your anxiety rises, and to recognize when their anxiety base gets to a certain level, and then to work with them and brainstorm with them strategies that will help to reduce the base. So meltdowns that nobody enjoys will be reduced. It's no surprise that this is not easy or quick, but it really can be a critical component for a child who has meltdowns that appear to have no rhyme or reason or any triggers. So again, teaching the child about the emotional base and how it feels when it starts getting full, and coming up with a plan that everybody knows about, the plan of what reduces the vase. So it may be going in to get a drink, it may be visiting the nurse for a minute, it may be doodling, it may be chewing gum, it may be getting up and sharpening a pencil. It really depends on the child. So strategies like this are positive and proactive. Positive and proactive strategies teach the child lifelong strategies, how to manage the anxiety. So kids with neurological disorders can't necessarily always stop or control their symptoms, but for some of the more difficult symptoms, they need to learn to manage them. And using the emotional vase, for one thing, is an example of helping the child learn to manage the anxiety. I've seen some very young children be able to do this with support, and I've also seen this help adults who have some anxiety difficulties. Teaching is what we adults should be doing for children with challenging behaviors. Instead of punishing, negative consequences don't teach, and if you ask a lot of parents and a lot of teachers, negative consequences often backfire and make things much worse. So I've seen a lot of studies, which make me happy, that talk about the success of positive and proactive interventions. Even the U.S. Federal Department of Education, a few years back, developed a guide for all schools, giving them suggestions regarding positive and proactive supports for students. Basically, it comes down to what can we do for the child prior to the behavior, instead of what do we do to them after the behavior has occurred. What do we do for the child prior to the behavior, instead of what are we going to do to them after. And a good example of this is Humpty Dumpty. So Humpty, we know if you fall off that wall, all the king's horses and all the king's men aren't going to be able to put you back together again. So how can I help you stay on that wall? Or Humpty Dumpty, how can I help you get down from that wall so you don't break? Or Humpty, can we talk? Why do you need to get up there in the first place? And is there something else we can do so you don't have to get up there? Positive and proactive. I'm sharing this slide because one of my goals as the education specialist for the Tourette Association is to bring awareness of how extremely complex this disorder is. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 1 in every 162 students have Tourette, and that sadly approximately 50% of them remain undiagnosed. I'm certainly not trying to imply that if a child has challenging behaviors that they have Tourette Syndrome. What I do want to do is bring awareness to this complex disorder and attempt to increase the percentage of kids who do have Tourette and to have the appropriate diagnosis and educational supports. So some of the takeaway important points. Hidden disabilities may be the reason for the challenging behaviors, so be curious and learn about them, be aware of them. If we ignore finding out what the reason is, we definitely can help in changing the behaviors. Recognize when you make an assumption and be curious instead. Positive and proactive interventions teach and are more effective than negative consequences. And try not to take behaviors personally. When we do, we get angry, and anger doesn't encourage a person to be curious and look for the real reasons. I'm pleased that we were able to collaborate with the Parent Information and Training Center on this webinar because they provide support for parents of children with challenging behaviors across the country, regardless if there is or isn't a diagnosis or regardless what the diagnosis is. With that, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Laura Arrington, and then open it up for question and answer with both Laura and myself answering your questions.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to share some information about the Parent Training Information Centers, especially since we had such a large group of people who didn't or weren't familiar with Parent Training Information Centers. The good news is there is at least one, and in every state. In New York State, I believe there are actually 3. We hold the grant for except for Long Island and New York City. And but you can go out to the Parent Training Information Center website. You can actually just Google it, and there's a map that you can click on of the United States. And so if you, whether you live in Hawaii or Alaska or in Kansas, you can click on your state and it will tell you about your Parent Training Information Center. They can talk to you about information in regards to your child. If you feel that they may have a disability or may need supports and services, and help provide you with services and local information about policies and procedures in your area. So I really wanted to share that information with you today, so thank you so much. And then as well, we have some information about our agency. And Kathy, if you'd go to the next slide. That's Starbridge, and we are also a Parent Training Information Center. We're located here in Rochester, New York. And if you'd like to know more information about Starbridge, there is our website, our number, and I will say that even a lot of times people may call and we may refer people to a Parent Training Information Center at another state or at another location such as Long Island or New York City as well. So I really wanted to share that. And I think there might be one more slide too, Kathy.
Oh.
Oh, and it's us.
I don't know if it's, nope.
So
Okay.
I think, Kathy, you wanted to take the time to open it up for some questions.
Well, yeah, I'll turn it back to Allie.
So it looks like right now we have one question, and I had put this into into our chat, but we will be recording this webinar, and it will be available on the Tourette Association website. as well as the Tourette Association YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours of this broadcast. So stay tuned. And also if you, for those who've already who'd registered for the webinar, they'll get an email about it as well. But I encourage you now to submit your questions that you have for Kathy or for Laura. We'd be happy to field those. And you can submit those through your questions pane in your control panel. All right, so it looks like we have a couple. What are your thoughts about medication? I'm not a fan, but it seems like pediatric neurologists push for that. Thoughts?
That's a tough question, and it really depends on the individual, and it really is a choice that the parents need to take and make. My son was on medication, and it was helpful, but he's 33, so this was a long time ago. And now, there are some more strategies that I would certainly want to try first. The teaching of the base, the positive and proactive, and but medication does have its place. It's just an individual choice.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question here. Do you find that children benefit from interacting with another child with Tourette's, such as in a support group or talking about it?
Yeah, we do. I know some parents are kind of resistant to doing that because they're afraid that their child will pick up the tics of or the difficulties of the other child. But it's so isolating to think that you're the only kid in the world that has this going on. And so to talk to another person, to meet other kids, there are Tourette camps throughout the country. Every 2 years we have a conference, and we have a children's program at the conference, and it's just, we know the kids leave these camps and our program just so happy to know that there's some other kids like them. So I personally think it's a good idea. When my son went away to college, people were encouraging me to find a roommate that had Tourette. I didn't think that was a good idea, but I definitely think it's a good idea for the kids to go to support groups together, to go bowling together, to interact with each other, so that they know they're not alone. And also for the parents, because as parents we often feel like we're isolated and alone, and we get judged, we already have the personal mother guilt, and then when the rest of the world starts blaming us, it's really, really important to find other parents that have a child with similar issues, so that again you're not isolated and you have somebody to bounce off of.
All right, thank you. Kathy, what are the best strategies for advocating for your child during an IEP when the team is focused on the behavior being willful and attention-seeking as the only explanation?
I would suggest that you bring some of our materials and make a copy for everyone and highlight the areas that are specific to your child. There's a really good book. I'm not even sure it's in print anymore, but it was by Rose, and it's about disinhibition. I've known of parents that will use that at an IEP meeting. If you bring something that's credible, and the Tourette Association is credible, the information to the meeting, then that can be helpful. It's also helpful if you have a Tourette chapter near you to bring somebody from the chapter, somebody that can be seen not necessarily as your advocate, but as a person knowledgeable about Tourette syndrome. And one of the things that we offer is to have a team meeting, and either myself or somebody from the Education Advisory Board can be on a phone fielding questions, so the team can ask us any questions and we can help them sort of understand. And again, we're not your advocate, but just helping them understand Tourette and that it's a neurological disorder and it's not willful misbehaving can sometimes be helpful.
Thank you, Kathy. So we have another question, and it's, what about copralia and the classroom? My son has just developed this, and we are terrified for school. Do you have any thoughts on this?
We actually have an article that's specific to that. Your son may or may not use the copralia in the school. I certainly would want to warn the school ahead of time, and it's a really nice idea to have somebody educate the classmates. We have a program, it's called Youth Ambassador Program, and we actually train teenagers who have Tourette's or who are a sibling. We train them on doing presentations, and so they go into schools and do assemblies or classrooms, talk about their Tourette's, and again, field questions about Tourette's. So the more people know, the more they can ignore it. And the more symptoms are ignored, the less likely they're going to happen, which I know sounds counterproductive or counter-true, but we have really found that if a kid is worried about getting punished for saying something inappropriate, then it's going to be on their brain, and it's going to be more likely that they're going to do it. But if they know it's just going to be ignored, then they don't have to focus on it, they don't have to think about it that much, and so it's less likely to occur. If you have any issues with that, please email us, and we can talk to you about that. We can talk to the school about it. We can see, how we can be helpful with that.
Thanks, Kathy. What is a good book you would recommend for challenging behaviors?
That's a difficult question because my son and I wrote a book, and I'm not sure that I'm supposed to advertise it on this. So clearly I would think that was good. It's called Family's Quest for Rhythm, but Ross Green. Go on and Google his name, go to his website. His website is Lives in the Balance, and he has a book called The Explosive Child. He has another new book out that I'm blanking on. I don't know. I'm blanking on it. But if you go to his website, he's superb. He, like I said in the presentation, changed my life, and he is really, really excellent for those type of topics.
All right. And do you know of any resources for teachers who are struggling with a child who has TS in the classroom?
Our website has lots and lots and lots of resources. I mean, everything from understanding what it is, and we have a guide for an educator's guide for developing a plan. We talk about specific symptoms, and we give a lot of suggestions. Mostly, we don't have all the answers, but we like to give some examples so that people can think, well, you need to think outside the box, but obviously there may be something that's going to help the child. So our website really has a lot of information for educators. And we also have and Ellie, I don't know if you want to talk about this, we have a CDC program where we do in-services for schools.
Yeah, so as part of our partnership with the CDC, we actually go to schools and do presentations and in-services. We go to director meetings, regional director meetings. We go to school districts. The invitation would need to come from the school themselves, either a school administrator or a teacher there, who would be there to sort of set it up. But anyone from the school who is interested, they can contact the Tourette Association for more information about our programs and how to set that up. So we welcome that going forward.
They can also contact us, and we could send them we have a CD of an education in-service that we did a few years back that can be really helpful for teachers as well.
Yes. All right, Kathy, we have a couple more questions. Is it true that kids with TS tend to be a few years behind in their emotional development? I heard kids with TS are more likely, more like those 2/3 their age.
Yeah, that's actually a Ross Green. Ross Green and Rick Lavoie both agree that kids with Tourette Syndrome and other similar neurological disorders are often about 2/3 their chronological age with their emotional growth. So if you've got a child that's in 5th grade, his emotional levels may be at 3rd grade, or his ability to deal with frustration, his social interactions. They eventually do catch up, but you're right, it's usual for a kid with Tourette to be at a younger age than chronological age.
All right. Someone asked, are there handouts included in the webinar? And yes, there are. So there is a handout with the slides from today's webinar. There's also an article, TS is more than tics, and the functional, the identifying common education difficulties with TS. So Kathy, can you just talk a little bit about those 2 articles that we have attached here?
Yeah, sure. The indicators article is, I'm not sure how many there are, but it's like a front and a back. So it's pretty brief. It talks about a lot of the common related difficulties for kids with Tourette, and particularly education difficulties. And then there's a sentence or 2 describing it. The article, I have Tourette, but Tourette doesn't have, and both of these articles actually are 2 of our most popular articles. The Tourette is more than tics is lengthier, so we go into a lengthier explanation of what executive functioning is and how it impacts kids with Tourette. How disinhibition, what is that, and how does that impact? So it's a lot of the same disabilities and difficulties, but in more depth. And so those really are 2 of our more popular articles.
All right, and we just have a couple more questions, and if we haven't gone to your question, we can email you directly with an answer within the next 24 hours. We'll make sure that Kathy can respond to those to you directly. We have your email addresses, so we'll just email you. And then, so for the next question, I need more explanation about hidden disabilities. What does it mean? What does it mean when we say hidden?
Yeah, hidden disabilities are like, it's not like epilepsy or cerebral palsy or, Down syndrome or, disabilities that are more obvious. Attention deficit, you can't really see attention deficit. A kid might be very distracted, but you can't, it's not obvious. Obsessive compulsive, it's not really something that is physically obvious to somebody. So the hidden disabilities is disabilities that just aren't obvious, and people mostly aren't aware of them. I mean, how many people know about dysgraphia? But it's a real thing. Kids with Tourette have a major problem with handwriting, and so kids with Tourette should be allowed to use keyboarding. So hidden disabilities are the disabilities that can significantly impact, and a lot of kids with Tourette are very, very bright, but these hidden disabilities like executive functioning is just total disorganization. can really impact the child.
All right. So we have time for one more question before we wrap up. How do you help a child whose parents don't like the idea of their child having a psych issue and are resistant to getting the child diagnosed?
I'm sorry, you kind of, I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
Sure. So how do you help a child whose parents don't like the idea of their child having a psych issue and are resistant to getting the child diagnosed?
That's a tough one. And I have talked to parents that are resistant, and unfortunately I think of a lot of it is because of the stigma that that goes along with Tourette because of awful movies and awful TV shows. But getting the child a diagnosis and letting the child know and letting him know that it's 1 in 100 kids have either Tourette or chronic tic disorder, so it's not all that unusual. And having a diagnosis can really, really, really help when you go to the school for support. So if you go to the school and you say, my son needs to use a computer because his handwriting is sloppy, they're going to say, well, no, he doesn't, and he just needs to try harder. But if you can go in there and say, you know, look, he has a diagnosis of Tourette Syndrome, and a very common related disorder is dysgraphia, difficulty with the handwriting, then you're more likely to be getting the supports. And as far as the psychological thing, I wonder if they're concerned because the evaluations at school are called psycho-educational evaluations, and I wish they weren't called that. Because the psychological part of it is just determining what the child is capable of, and the second part, the psychoeducational, the educational component is saying where he is at the moment. So I have talked to parents that are resistant to both getting the evaluations because they think it's some kind of psychological thing when it really isn't. And I've also had parents that are afraid that if the child is diagnosed that it's going to be a stigma and they're not going to be able to get a job and it's going to follow them the rest of their life. And anything that is done in school, there's a federal law called FERPA, and the parents and then the adult child has control over who sees their records. So it doesn't necessarily follow them into adult life. And as a lot of people know, Tourette syndrome frequently gets better as a child gets older, and lots of times as an adult it becomes fairly mild. So I personally encourage parents to get a diagnosis. It's not something to be afraid of, and I think when there's secrets, secrets are usually not good. There's something to be ashamed of, and Tourette syndrome is nothing. There's nothing about Tourette to be ashamed of. I have not for 1 minute have I ever been ashamed of my son having Tourette. So
Thank you,
I would encourage diagnosis. I would encourage letting the school know if it bothers them. I mean, there's some kids with so mild you wouldn't necessarily need to tell the school. But if it's all impacting, then the school should probably know.
Thanks, and I think that's a really good question to end on for tonight. So I just want to thank you, Kathy and Laura, for a great presentation. And again, if we did not answer your question on this webinar, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly by email. And once you have left this webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation. We would really appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. And additionally, the webinar will be posted on the Tourette Association YouTube channel as well as our website for those who aren't able to participate today. We encourage you to reach out to us on social media about this webinar or other ideas and suggestions that you have. And on behalf of the Tourette Association, thank you again so much for joining us and taking the time to view our presentation. Have a good night.